Hey everyone. So, technically, this video is a month early because this nice dude here comes on the 5th of December and not during Halloween. But I figured we're all in the mood for something a little spooky, right? So I have this handsome fella here who is a Krampus. Now, Krampus in Austria traditionally comes, like I said, on the 5th of December. So just before the Nikolaus, who brings presents to children who've behaved well. And I guess you can imagine what happens to children who did not behave well. Well, they have an encounter with this guy. In fact, I remember the campus from when I was a kid. The 5th of December is not necessarily a day that I was excited about, because you would often have groups of these running around in the city centre. I think it's rarer here in Vienna, but in the other parts of Austria that's quite common. They would wear these masks, and then they would have a belt with bells. These are quite small. Sometimes you would have like enormous cowbells that would make a lot of noise. And they would have a rod. And would, in fact, often really try and hit you. So I remember groups of children running away from these. I think for some it was quite entertaining, but I was always a bit scared. So let's see what he looks like. This is a mask made of wood. It's hand carved, as are most masks. It's not necessarily traditional, because while the Krampus is very, very common here, traditions, of course, change. And people take some liberties with the interpretation of what they look like. He has some real horns. These are from a goat. I can see it was probably a goat who took some adventures too. And he has I don't know what you call this, a goatee. In German you would say a Geissbart. He has some bad teeth too. Should probably see a dentist. And what's quite cleverly made is that here what looks like some black eyeliner under the eyes, actually where you can look at. There's a little slit that allows you to see when you wear the mask. And you can breathe through his nose. So that's quite cool. On the back he has some wild black hair that I'm not going to try and brush, because I don't think he would like that. I think he wants to look quite wild. So now I want to show you some pictures of the Krampus together with the Nikolaus at the start of December. Let's put him here on the side for a bit. like this. So here we have an illustration, Nikolaus and Knecht Ruprecht. So Knecht Ruprecht is more of a northern figure. You would find him in the north of Germany. In Austria or in the south of Germany, you would find the Krampus. And they're coming on Nikolausabend. You can see here the Nikolaus with the bishop's hat, giving away presents to good children, like this one here. And here we have a child who probably isn't getting any presents. The poor kid. And there's the Krampus here in the back with the rod. And in the back with a basket, because it was told, at least when I was a kid, that the Krampus would come and steal you away if you weren't a good kid. So quite scary, really. Here we have a photo. It says here they are Klausen. So there are many different names. I think this still falls on the Krampus. You can see the wild faces, and these have a lot more horns than our fella here. You can see the big cowbells here. I also know costumes where they wear them on the back, which I think is more common. And nowadays they also often wear outfits made of some kind of fur or fur-like material. And in the center again you have the Nikolaus. Now you might think that is a really weird tradition, especially for children. Why would people do that? Well, it gets a lot weirder than that. Because there's not just the Krampus. There's another figure that can take many different forms, and let's say it's something like the cousin of the Krampus, and they are called Perchten. In this case, they're Perchten, or sometimes it's also spelled as one word, Perchten. Schich meaning ugly, and this is in fact related to the English word shy, which can mean to be shy, but also to shy away from something, or in German it might be scheuchen, which means to chase away. So yes, they might be chasing you away, or maybe they're chasing the winter demons away. That's another interpretation, so spring can come back. I really like this kind of picture with the snowy mountains in the background. It's quite eerie, really, isn't it? And pretty creepy, if you ask me. Here we have another costume, two bears. This is from the 80s. And Here we have some more masks from the 1970s. They're from the Salzburg area. With many different horns sticking out in all directions. This one has big teeth too. And you can see that the wearer is looking out through the eyes. You have a warm fur coat. It looks quite wild, doesn't it? But the Perchten don't just come around Christmas. In fact, there are some different masks. They don't always look like that, because if we say specifically that these are Schirperchten, so ugly ones, it only makes sense to assume that they are different kinds too, which might even be beautiful. Let's see if we can find some. So, these look quite different, don't they? Let's put a little fella to the side for a moment. So, this looks quite differently, doesn't it? You have a beautiful, clean face with a smile. Again, the wearer can look out through the eyes. We don't have horns, but instead this amazing, gorgeous headdress made of what looks like leaves and flowers and other kinds of materials in red, white, pink. There's another figure here in the back. Again, you can see the bells on the belt. So they make quite a lot of noise when they move through the city center or the town center. Beautiful costume. These gorgeous patterns here in white and red, and some male figures next to it with gigantic beards. Now, if you're thinking this looks a little more like carnival, then in fact you're right. And I think it becomes even more evident here. This is quite clearly more of a carnival thing. Again, gorgeous masks, beautiful costumes that look quite old again. Now, these aren't necessarily Perchten. I'm not sure whether you would call them that. But there is a connection to sort of more creature-like costumes in the same area and around the same time. This is during the end of winter, and from what I know, in, for example, Tyrol, it's quite common that Perchtenläufe or Perchten runs happen later in winter, so when it comes time to visit spring. Krampus, our nice creature that we've just seen, comes during December. And they probably have somewhat related origins, but it's really hard to say where exactly they come from. One of the earliest images that we have is medieval, but a lot of people will think that it's even older, that it might be something pagan even that's been carried over. We don't really know of that, so there's no clear source that would prove that. nonetheless, it's the actual origin of these Perchten runs that you have throughout the entirety of winter in all of the Eastern Alps probably date back to this creature here. This is Frau Perchte. Sometimes in these old texts from the late Middle Ages also called Domina Perchte, so you might even be a little more scared than you would be otherwise. And she's a bit of a mythical person. We don't really know where she comes from or who brought her here into this area. But she's often described as having a long nose and a face that itself looks a little like a mask, don't you think? And again with the big eyes. And just as we've seen with the Perchten, where there's ugly ones and beautiful ones, so there are two different sides to Frau Perchte. For one, we have some legends, so let's have a look at those. In some of these legends, Frau Perchte is described as being very, very beautiful, as shining even. And she comes during the 12 nights of Christmas, together with the wild hunt. Wild hunt being little children that have not been baptized. It is said that if you give one of these children a name, you can save it. And these names can be quite funny. It doesn't have to be an actual name. There's one story, for example, where a farmer in Carinthia ran into Frau Perchte with a wild hunt. And he saw one kid that looked so poor, he just yelled out, "O du arms Zorderwascher." Zodern means torn clothes, and Waschal is a small kid that can't walk yet. And with that, the little child was saved. It's also said that Frau Perchte rewards help, so you can't just save the children, she will also reward you. However, if you're trying to hide somewhere to catch a glimpse of her as she rushes past, she will find you and blind you for a year. So she can be good, but she can also be quite scary. And then, of course, there's another part. There's also the so-called Butzepercht. Let's see where we have her. So there are stories where Frau Perchte is described more like this. She looks really ugly, with a runny nose. She has this big wicker basket that we've seen earlier with the Krampus. And she has already collected a whole group of children to carry away. In fact, she doesn't just go after children, she might also catch you and drag you away to a faraway land and then leave your dead body back with strange exotic flowers and plants growing between your fingers. So when they find you, they'll know what happened to you. We can see her torn clothes. And there's a group of women trying to hide away from her. So the interesting thing is there aren't just stories about Frau Perchte turning up during the 12 nights of Christmas, but sometimes also earlier than that, usually before Christian holidays, which were traditionally days on which you had to fast and you weren't allowed to work. And she would come into the home and check that you really were fasting and that you weren't working. And bad things could happen if you did work. And if we leave the stories and instead look at what actually happened historically, we can see that in some small villages there's a tradition of people dressing up as Frau Perchte, in these cases 3 different ones, and actually visiting the home of people. So they would go inside, and you can see that this one has a broom. So they would check that everything is nice and clean in the home, which honestly is not necessarily a tradition that I would be keen on. I don't want Frau Perchte coming into my house. You can also see here that these people dressed up, and part of that dress was a mask. However, it's a very simple mask. It's not made of wood, it's just sometimes a piece of cloth to hide the face. In fact, when little girls were dressed up as Perchten, they wouldn't get a mask at all. They would just brush their hair forward to hide their faces. And honestly, I think this is one of the creepiest pictures I've ever seen from this area anywhere. And unfortunately, it doesn't say when it's from, only that it's from Styria. Es ist Perchten mit Haarschleiermasken. I mean, honestly, I would watch this horror film. There are a lot of strange forms of Perchten. This one's quite common, a Schnabelpercht, again with the wicker basket and the broom, also with scissors, not necessarily instilling confidence in me, or even bigger scissors. I haven't seen any mention of what these were for. Maybe they're just part of the costume, but it's really creepy. In some places it's common to prepare some food for the Perchten, like here, Perchtenmilch. In this case, people would eat from it together and then prepare it for Frau Perchte. In some cases, everyone would have one extra portion and then leave the spoon in it so that it would stick up. And if it was still standing the next day, it meant that the next year would bring you good fortune. But I think these are all very regional traditions. And in fact, if we look at some of the other images, you get the idea that these are often really closely tied to the way people were living. So let me just check. It's a tradition that dates back to the late Middle Ages, and of course most people were living off the land, with the land. A lot of people were farmers, and so you would have Perchten that would reflect that. Example here. This is, I think, from Bavaria, the Mandeln. It looks quite difficult to get people into the costume. But also here, for example, these are Pinzgauer Schönperchten, and you can tell that they are farmers. So it also makes sense that over the course of the 19th century, these traditions kind of fell out of use. People lost interest. They just didn't mean a lot anymore to the way people began to live, namely in more urban areas. It's also the time when people became academically interested in them, or academically for the time, and people started speculating about where these practices came from. And like I said, a lot of people assumed that they were somehow pagan rites that had somehow survived and carried over into our days. But that's really quite unlikely. It's probably rather a late medieval traditions that then later morphed into something like the carnival, and that way got preserved through the ages. And now I want to show you some of my favorite Perchten, because like I said, there's ugly ones, but then there are also beautiful ones, and I think the most beautiful ones are in these Salzkammergut. These are Glöckler. 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 So you can tell this is in the deep of winter, before the 6th of January. And instead of masks to cover the face, they have these elaborate headdresses with beautiful patterns that shine in the night. We can see here how they're made. You have a wooden construction in the center, and these actually have candles inside. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They come in all kinds of patterns. Here there's even a butterfly. And I just think they look absolutely gorgeous. Here in the late twilight, that comes really early in winter. I really adore these. I think this might be my favorite picture. can see one of the smaller mountains in the background and the snow here in the front, and all of these different beautiful points of light just wandering through the night. Just really, really gorgeous. And of course you can visit one of these Perchten runs, but the more popular type is a Krampus and Perchtenlauf, where you have all kinds of devil figures. Like this guy here. And it might seem strange, but honestly, in winter, this is just completely normal here in the Alps. Should you ever be here, maybe on holiday, maybe if you want to go skiing and you run into one of these, you don't have to be worried, but you wouldn't be wrong to be a little bit scared. Alright. I hope you enjoyed this little journey into the strange traditions of the Alps that happen not just around Halloween, but throughout all of winter. I hope you can sleep well anyway, and I'll see you again next week.